It was a bright, crisp morning when the news broke, sending ripples through the serene community of Elmwood Hills. The prestigious Windsor Academy, a school with a legacy stretching back over a century, had announced its new headmaster. For decades, Windsor Academy had been synonymous with tradition, excellence, and exclusivity, a place where the children of the wealthy and powerful were groomed for success. But this appointment was unlike any other. For the first time in its storied history, the school had chosen a black woman to lead its ranks. Her name was Dr. Naomi Bennett, a brilliant educator with an impeccable track record, a disarming smile, and a passion for breaking barriers. Dr. Bennett wasn't just a trailblazer in education, she was a force of nature. Raised in the working-class neighborhoods of Chicago, she had clawed her way up through sheer determination, earning degrees from Ivy League institutions and accolades from schools across the country. She was known for her ability to connect with students, have innovative teaching methods, and her unwavering commitment to diversity and inclusion. Her appointment wasn't just a victory for her, it was a symbolic moment for many who had long felt excluded from the elite echelons of institutions like Windsor. But while some saw her as a beacon of hope, others viewed her as a threat. The tight-knit group of wealthy, predominantly white parents who had long held sway over Windsor Academy's decisions weren't ready to embrace the change. These were people who had built their lives and their children's futures on control and influence. They had donated millions to the school, hosted lavish fundraisers, and ensured their voices were heard in every decision. And now they felt blindsided. Whispers of discontent began circulating almost immediately. In the opulent mansions and country clubs of Elmwood Hills, the conversations grew more pointed. "She doesn't understand our values," one mother muttered during a charity luncheon. "This isn't about race," another father claimed, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's about maintaining the standards that make Windsor what it is." Naomi, of course, was no stranger to resistance. She had faced skepticism at nearly every step of her career. But this felt different. The backlash wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. It wasn't long before anonymous letters began arriving at her office, questioning her qualifications and suggesting she was chosen for her symbolism rather than her abilities. Social media platforms buzzed with subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, jabs from disgruntled parents. Even the local paper ran an editorial questioning whether Windsor Academy was sacrificing tradition for political correctness. Amid the growing tension, Naomi remained steadfast. She spent her first few weeks meeting with teachers, listening to students, and studying the school's culture. Her vision was clear. She wanted Windsor to be a place where excellence and inclusivity could coexist. But she knew she would have to navigate a minefield of resistance to make that vision a reality. The real trouble began during the first board meeting of the year. Naomi had prepared a comprehensive plan to modernize the curriculum, introduce scholarships for underprivileged students, and implement diversity training for staff. But as she presented her ideas, she could feel the weight of the room's skepticism. The board members, many of whom were parents, responded with polite smiles that barely concealed their hostility. One board member, a prominent lawyer named Charles Harrington, leaned forward with a thin smile. "Dr. Bennett, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, Windsor has always been a school that values tradition. Change is delicate here." Naomi met his gaze without flinching. "I understand the importance of tradition, Mr. Harrington, but tradition shouldn't be a barrier to progress. Windsor can honor its past while preparing for the future." Her words were met with silence, followed by a few murmurs. She knew she had struck a nerve, but she also knew this was just the beginning. Outside the walls of Windsor, the story had begun to gain national attention. News outlets picked up on the controversy, framing it as a clash between progress and privilege. Supporters of Naomi flooded social media with messages of encouragement, while detractors doubled down, accusing her of trying to radically change the school. Naomi's greatest challenge, however, wasn't the parents or the media. It was the students. Many of them came from families that opposed her appointment, and their attitudes reflected the tensions at home. Some were openly dismissive, while others were more subtle, refusing to participate in her initiatives or questioning her authority. But there were also glimmers of hope, students who were inspired by her story, who saw in her a role model they had never had before. As the weeks went by, the stakes continued to rise. A group of parents began organizing behind the scenes, rallying support to oust Naomi. They called themselves the Windsor Preservation Committee and claimed their goal was to protect the school's legacy. But their true motives were clear to anyone paying attention. Naomi, however, refused to back down. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Allies began to emerge: teachers who believed in her vision, parents who welcomed the change, and students who saw the value in a more inclusive Windsor Academy. Yet, just as Naomi started to gain momentum, an unexpected event threatened to derail everything. A scandal, one that seemed almost too convenient, surfaced, implicating her in a financial misstep from her previous job. The news spread like wildfire, giving her detractors exactly what they needed to question her integrity. But was the scandal real, or was it a carefully orchestrated attempt to remove her from power? And if it was the latter, who was behind it? As the storm clouds gathered over Windsor Academy, Naomi found herself at a crossroads. She could fight to clear her name and continue her mission, or she could walk away, leaving behind the dream she had worked so hard to achieve. The choice wasn't just about her career. It was about what kind of legacy she wanted to leave, for herself, for the school, and for the generations of students who would come after her. And as the pressure mounted, one thing became clear. This was a battle that would test not only Naomi's resilience, but also the very soul of Windsor Academy. The news of the scandal hit Naomi like a freight train. She sat alone in her office, staring at the email from an anonymous source that had leaked the accusation to the school board and several prominent parents. It claimed she had misappropriated funds at her previous school, painting her as reckless and untrustworthy. Naomi knew the claim was baseless, but she also knew how damaging even the hint of impropriety could be, especially in a place like Windsor, where reputation was everything. By the time she stepped out of her office, the whispers had already started. Staff members avoided her gaze in the hallway, their polite greetings now laced with unease. Parents who had once been cautiously optimistic about her leadership began sending emails to the board, demanding answers. The students were more brazen. Snide remarks and stifled laughter followed her during her daily rounds. She overheard one group joking, "Guess you won't last the semester." It wasn't just the accusation itself that hurt. It was the reminder of how quickly people were willing to believe the worst about her. Naomi had seen it before in her career, the way a single rumor could grow legs and sprint ahead of the truth. But this time, the stakes felt impossibly high. If she couldn't clear her name, everything she had worked for would crumble. Despite the mounting pressure, Naomi wasn't ready to give up. She called an emergency meeting with the school board to address the allegations head-on. As she sat in the boardroom, surrounded by Windsor's most powerful stakeholders, the tension was palpable. Charles Harrington, as always, was the first to speak. His tone was calm but pointed, designed to corner her without appearing overtly hostile. "Dr. Bennett," he began, adjusting his glasses, "I'm sure you understand the gravity of these accusations. For the sake of the school's reputation, we must investigate thoroughly. But I have to ask, why do you think this has come to light now?" Naomi held her head high, refusing to let her voice waver. "I believe someone is trying to discredit me, Mr. Harrington. The timing is too convenient to be a coincidence." His lips curled into a faint smile. And who, exactly, would have a motive to do such a thing? She could feel the weight of the room's scrutiny pressing down on her. Naming names without proof would only make her look paranoid. "I don't have evidence yet," she said carefully, "but I intend to find out. What I ask of this board is fairness. Let the investigation proceed, but until there's actual proof, I hope I'll have your support to continue leading this school." Her words hung in the air, met with a mixture of nods and skeptical glances. Harrington leaned back in his chair, clearly unsatisfied but unable to push further without looking biased. Naomi knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The real battle was just beginning. Outside the boardroom, Naomi found herself grappling with another challenge. Who could she trust? She had always prided herself on building relationships wherever she went, but Windsor's culture of secrecy and exclusivity made it hard to tell friend from foe. Even among the staff, there were those who resented her appointment, though they rarely voiced it outright. And then there were the parents, many of whom seemed intent on undermining her at every turn. One person who stood by her side was Sarah Puttle, Windsor's assistant headmaster. Sarah was sharp, pragmatic, and one of the few people who seemed genuinely excited about Naomi's vision for the school. Late one evening, as they worked together in Naomi's office, Sarah leaned in and said quietly, "You know this scandal isn't random, right? Someone's trying to take you down." Naomi nodded, grateful for the affirmation but frustrated by the lack of answers. "I know. The question is who? And why now?" Sarah hesitated before speaking. "Have you heard of the Preservation Committee?" Naomi's brow furrowed. "I've heard whispers. But what do you know about them?" Sarah glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "They're a small but powerful group of parents. They don't officially exist, of course, but everyone knows they're the ones who really control Windsor. Every major decision, every headmaster in the last 2 decades, they've had a hand in it, and they're not happy about you." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed made the threat feel even more real. "Do you think they're behind the scandal?" "It's possible," Sarah said, "but they're smart. They wouldn't leave any obvious trail. If you want to fight back, you'll need more than just a hunch." The conversation lingered in Naomi's mind long after Sarah left. If the Preservation Committee was involved, how far were they willing to go? And what would it take to expose them without destroying her own reputation in the process? Meanwhile, the scandal had emboldened her detractors. At school events, she could feel the cold stares of parents who once pretended to be polite. During a fundraiser, one mother cornered her near the refreshment table, her voice dripping with forced concern. "Dr. Bennett, I just want to say how sorry I am about all this unpleasantness. It must be so hard for you." Naomi forced a smile, her tone measured. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm confident the truth will come out." The woman's eyes gleamed with thinly veiled satisfaction. "Well, I hope so. For the school's sake, of course." Moments like these reminded Naomi that she was up against more than just rumors. She was battling a deeply ingrained system of power and privilege. And yet, despite the mounting challenges, she refused to let them break her. If anything, they only strengthened her resolve. Her first step was to gather allies. She reached out to teachers and staff who had shown even the slightest support for her ideas, inviting them to informal meetings to discuss their shared goals for the school. Slowly but surely, she began to build a coalition of people who believed in her vision and were willing to stand by her, even in the face of opposition. But as Naomi worked to rally her supporters, the Preservation Committee was escalating their efforts. Late one night, as she reviewed budget proposals in her office, her phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, "A word of advice." She hesitated before opening it, her pulse quickening. The message was short and chilling. "Leave now, while you still can. This isn't your fight to win." Naomi stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just trying to undermine her. They were trying to intimidate her into leaving altogether. But as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by a steely determination. She'd have faced threats before, and she wasn't about to let this one scare her away. Still, the email raised a troubling question. How far were these people willing to go to get rid of her? And as the days turned into weeks, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, her every move scrutinized for any misstep they could exploit. The stakes had never been higher, and the path forward was fraught with uncertainty. But Naomi knew one thing for sure: she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The email lingered in Naomi's mind for days, an unsettling reminder of just how personal this fight had become. She didn't tell anyone about it, not even Sarah. The fewer people who knew, the better. But every time she walked into a meeting or stepped into a classroom, she found herself glancing over her shoulder, wondering who might be watching, waiting for her to fail. The tension around the school only deepened as whispers of the preservation committee grew louder. Naomi started noticing patterns she hadn't seen before, small, seemingly inconsequential acts of defiance that, when added up, began to feel orchestrated. A faculty member suddenly backed out of supporting one of her new initiatives, citing vague concerns. Parents who had once been neutral started submitting complaints about everything from her policies to her demeanor. Even minor details, like her decision to reconfigure the cafeteria seating to encourage inclusivity, were met with exaggerated backlash. Meanwhile, Naomi's investigation into the source of the scandal continued quietly. She combed through old records from her previous school, searching for any clue as to how the accusation had been fabricated. There was nothing. Every document was clean, every audit accounted for. She knew the truth, but proving it to others was another matter entirely. It didn't help that Windsor Academy seemed reluctant to investigate with any real urgency. The board claimed they were reviewing the situation, but weeks passed with no updates. At the same time, cracks began forming within the preservation committee itself. Though they operated in secrecy, Naomi had started to piece together who might be involved. Charles Harrington was an obvious leader, but there were others, parents who quietly wielded influence without ever stepping into the spotlight. Among them was Eleanor White, a longtime donor with a reputation for being both cunning and relentless. Eleanor had remained outwardly cordial toward Naomi, but there was a sharpness to her words that hinted at something deeper. One evening, Eleanor invited Naomi to a dinner party at her sprawling estate. The invitation was framed as a gesture of goodwill, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that it was more of a test. She accepted, knowing that declining might only fuel further speculation about her intentions. The dinner was as extravagant as Naomi expected: gleaming chandeliers, a table set with fine china, and a guest list that read like a who's who of Elmwood Hills elite. Eleanor greeted her with a warm smile, but Naomi could see the calculation in her eyes. "Dr. Bennett," Eleanor said, guiding her toward the dining room. "I've been meaning to get to know you better. It's not every day Windsor has such a historic appointment." "Thank you for the invitation," Naomi replied, keeping her tone polite but guarded. As the evening unfolded, the conversations around the table grew increasingly pointed. Questions about Naomi's plans for the school were couched in thinly veiled criticism. One father, a venture capitalist, asked if she thought radical changes were really necessary. Another guest suggested that Windsor's traditions were too precious to risk for the sake of experimentation. Naomi held her ground, answering each question with poise, but the undercurrent of hostility was unmistakable. Eleanor watched it all with a faint smile, saying little but clearly orchestrating the tone of the evening. It wasn't until dessert was served that Eleanor finally spoke directly to Naomi. "You've certainly stirred things up at Windsor," she said, her tone light, but her words heavy with implication. "Change can be unsettling for some, but you seem determined." "I am," Naomi replied evenly. "Windsor has an incredible legacy, but I believe it can grow into something even greater." Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Ambition is a fine quality, Dr. Bennett. Just be careful not to let it cloud your judgment." The warning hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Naomi left the dinner that night with a sinking feeling in her chest. Eleanor and her circle weren't just opposed to her. They were actively working against her, and they weren't afraid to play dirty. Back at the school, the students were grappling with their own versions of the conflict. While some admired Naomi's strength and vision, others mirrored the skepticism of their parents. Tensions flared in subtle ways. An argument during a debate club meeting, a group of seniors refusing to participate in an assembly she organized. One afternoon, Naomi overheard two students in the hallway talking about how the new headmaster is ruining everything. But not all the students were against her. One day, Naomi received a handwritten letter slipped under her office door. It was from Maya, a sophomore who had recently transferred to Windsor on a scholarship program that Naomi had expanded. The letter was short but heartfelt, thanking Naomi for giving students like her a chance to succeed in a school that had once felt unreachable. "You've made me feel like I belong here," Maya wrote. "Don't let them push you out." The letter brought tears to Naomi's eyes. It was a reminder of why she had taken the job in the first place. For every student who resisted her, there were others like Maya who were quietly cheering her on. Meanwhile, Sarah Patel continued to be a steadfast ally, though even she seemed increasingly wary of the forces at play. Late one night, as they reviewed a presentation for an upcoming parent meeting, Sarah sighed and said, "Naomi, I don't know how you're still standing. They're throwing everything at you." Naomi smiled faintly. "I don't have a choice. If I give up now, they win. And it's not just about me. It's about what this school could be." Sarah nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Just be careful. They're not playing fair, and I don't think they'll stop until they get what they want." As the weeks went on, the conflict reached a boiling point. A group of parents staged a protest outside the school, holding signs that read, "Preserve Windsor's legacy" and "No politics in education." The media descended on the scene, framing the story as a battle between tradition and progress. Naomi watched from her office window, her heart heavy but her resolve unshaken. Inside the school, the teachers were caught in the crossfire. Some were quietly supportive of Naomi, while others feared aligning with her might jeopardize their positions. The faculty lounge became a minefield of whispered conversations and strained silences. Naomi tried to rally the staff during a meeting, emphasizing the importance of unity, but she could see the fear in their faces. Even as the pressure mounted, Naomi refused to let her vision waver. She continued meeting with students, planning new initiatives, and advocating for the changes she believed in. But the weight of the opposition was beginning to take its toll, and as rumors of another anonymous source threatening to leak more damaging information surfaced, Naomi realized she was running out of time to uncover the truth and to prove that she belonged at Windsor Academy. The days leading up to Windsor Academy's annual gala were charged with an almost unbearable tension. The event, a lavish fundraiser attended by the city's wealthiest families, was meant to be a celebration of the school's accomplishments. But for Naomi, it felt more like a battlefield. She knew this was her last chance to solidify her position and prove her worth as headmaster, but she also sensed the preservation committee was planning something. The question was what? Behind the scenes, Naomi had been working tirelessly to uncover the truth. Sarah Patel had managed to dig up some leads, though none of them were conclusive. They had traced the email containing the false accusation against Naomi to an encrypted server, making it nearly impossible to identify the sender. Still, Sarah's instincts pointed to someone within the committee, someone with the resources and connections to cover their tracks. "It's Eleanor," Sarah said one evening, pacing Naomi's office. "I can feel it. She has the most to lose if you succeed. She's been funding half the programs that keep Windsor stuck in the past." Naomi sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Feeling it isn't enough. We need proof. Without it, I'm just another outsider making baseless accusations." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Then we keep digging. But be careful, Naomi. They're not just trying to discredit you, they're trying to destroy you." As the gala approached, Naomi decided she needed to take control of the narrative. She worked late into the night, crafting a speech that highlighted her vision for Windsor's future, a school that embraced diversity, innovation, and opportunity for all students, not just the privileged few. She knew it was risky. Speaking so boldly in front of a crowd that included many of her detractors could backfire, but she couldn't stay silent any longer. On the night of the event, the school's grand hall was transformed into a dazzling display of wealth and elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, while a live string quartet played softly in the background. Naomi arrived early, dressed in a simple but elegant black gown that contrasted sharply with the opulence around her. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, greeting parents and donors with polite smiles while silently bracing herself for what was to come. Eleanor White, as expected, was the center of attention. Draped in a shimmering silver gown, she commanded the room with an ease that came from years of being at the top of the social hierarchy. Naomi watched as Eleanor laughed and mingled, her sharp eyes constantly scanning the room. When their gazes met, Eleanor's smile faltered ever so slightly before she raised her glass in a mock toast. Naomi returned the gesture, her expression unreadable. The evening unfolded smoothly at first, though the undercurrent of tension was impossible to ignore. Naomi could feel the weight of every whispered conversation, every sideways glance. But she refused to let it shake her. When it was finally time for her speech, she stepped onto the stage with her head held high, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She began by thanking the community for their support, her voice steady despite the knots in her stomach. Then she pivoted to her vision for Windsor, a school that could honor its traditions while embracing change, a place where every student, regardless of background, could thrive. As she spoke, she scanned the crowd, noting the mix of reactions. Some parents nodded along, their expressions hopeful. Others, including Charles Harrington and Eleanor White, sat stone-faced, their disapproval palpable. But Naomi didn't stop. She addressed the challenges she'd faced since her appointment, acknowledging the controversy without directly naming her detractors. "Change is never easy," she said, her voice growing stronger. "But it is necessary. And I believe Windsor Academy is capable of becoming a beacon of excellence and inclusivity, a place where every student feels they belong." The room erupted in applause from some corners, but the atmosphere remained charged. As Naomi stepped off the stage, she felt a surge of pride. She had spoken her truth, and for the first time, it felt like she was winning over at least part of the audience. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. As the gala continued, an unsettling buzz began to ripple through the crowd. Naomi noticed people glancing at their phones, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock. Sarah hurried over, her face pale. "Naomi," she said in a hushed tone, "you need to see this." She handed Naomi her phone, where a series of screenshots had just been leaked on social media. They appeared to show Naomi misusing funds at her previous school, fabricated evidence designed to look damning. The timing couldn't have been worse, and Naomi immediately realized it was deliberate. The committee had been waiting for this moment, ensuring the scandal would overshadow everything she had said in her speech. The whispers grew louder as more people saw the posts. Naomi felt the stares of parents and donors piercing through her, their judgment swift and merciless. Her chest tightened, but she refused to let panic take over. She turned to Sarah. "We need to find out who leaked this and prove it's fake." Sarah nodded, already typing furiously on her phone. "I'll start tracing it, but you need to stay calm. Don't let them see you crack." Eleanor approached just then, her expression a picture of concern, though her eyes betrayed her satisfaction. "Dr. Bennett," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear about this. Unfortunate development. I can only imagine how stressful this must be for you." Naomi forced a smile, refusing to give Eleanor the reaction she was clearly fishing for. "Thank you, Mrs. White. I'm confident the truth will come out." Eleanor's smile widened ever so slightly. "I'm sure it will." As the night wore on, Naomi felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The gala had been meant to showcase her leadership and vision, but now it was overshadowed by yet another attempt to discredit her. Yet, even as the odds seemed insurmountable, she refused to back down. The truth was out there, and she was determined to find it. The battle wasn't over, but Naomi could feel the storm reaching its peak. All she could do now was hold her ground and prepare for whatever came next. As the night wore on, Naomi felt the room closing in around her. The whispers, the stares, the barely concealed smirks, it was a familiar script, one designed to isolate and humiliate. But this time, she wasn't the same woman who had quietly resigned from her previous post to avoid a fight. She was tired of playing by rules that didn't apply to her enemies. Sarah returned with updates, her voice low and urgent. The leak came from a private email chain. I can't trace the sender yet, but whoever did this is clever. They routed it through multiple servers to make it look legitimate. It's going to take time to untangle. Naomi exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Then we don't wait. Let's get ahead of it. If they're going to try to drag my name through the mud, we fight back. Sarah looked at her, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. You want to address this tonight? Naomi nodded firmly. If I don't, they'll control the narrative. We need to show people this isn't what it seems before it spirals. The room had already started to thin out as the night stretched on, but a significant number of parents and donors lingered, clearly savoring the unfolding drama. Naomi stepped back into the spotlight, her presence commanding despite the tension in the air. Tapping lightly on her glass, she drew the room's attention, her voice calm but unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, scanning the crowd. I'd like to take a moment to address something that's come to my attention tonight. It appears that some rather troubling accusations have surfaced. I want to assure all of you that I take these matters very seriously and am already working to address them. The room went silent, every pair of eyes locked on her. Naomi continued, her tone measured. I know there are those who believe I don't belong here, who see change as a threat rather than an opportunity. But let me be clear, I will not let lies or fear derail the progress we're making at Windsor Academy. For a brief moment, the room was still. Then, a smattering of applause broke out, small but significant. Naomi caught sight of Maya and a few other students standing near the back, clapping with quiet determination. It was enough to give her the strength to keep going. But just as she stepped off the stage, Sarah pulled her aside, her face pale. We have a bigger problem, she whispered. One of the teachers just texted me. A group of parents is planning to call for your resignation first thing tomorrow morning. They're saying this scandal is proof you're unfit to lead. Naomi's stomach twisted, but she refused to let fear take hold. Let them, she said, her voice steady. If they want a fight, they'll get one. The real twist came later that night. Back in her office, Naomi and Sarah were combing through emails and records, searching for anything that could prove the accusations false. It was nearly midnight when Sarah froze, her eyes widening as she stared at her laptop screen. Naomi, she said slowly, you need to see this. Naomi leaned over, her heart racing. On the screen was a series of messages between two members of the Preservation Committee, Eleanor White and Charles Harrington. The messages had been forwarded anonymously to Sarah's inbox, their origin impossible to trace. But the contents were explosive. I told you we needed to act sooner, one message read, clearly from Eleanor. Bennett is gaining too much ground. If this doesn't work, we'll have to escalate. The reply from Charles was even more chilling. She won't last long. The board will fold under pressure. But if she doesn't, we have other options. Naomi sat back, her mind racing. This wasn't just about protecting Windsor's traditions or opposing her leadership. This was a coordinated effort to oust her, a campaign of sabotage orchestrated by people who would stop at nothing to see her fail. Sarah broke the silence. Whoever sent this wants you to know the truth, but it's risky. If we use this without verifying its authenticity, it could blow up in our faces. Naomi nodded, her jaw tight. We need to be strategic. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about the school, the students, and everything we've worked for. We can't afford to make a mistake. But even as she spoke, another thought gnawed at the edges of her mind. Someone on the inside was helping her, feeding her information that could potentially expose Eleanor and Charles. But why? And could she trust them? The mystery deepened the next morning when Naomi found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy image of Eleanor and Charles sitting in a restaurant, deep in conversation. Scribbled on the back were the words, "They're not finished. Be ready." Naomi's pulse quickened as she stared at the photo. The stakes had never been higher, and the web of deceit was growing more tangled by the minute. She didn't know who her ally was, but one thing was clear: the Preservation Committee was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and if she didn't act soon, everything she had worked for could come crashing down. The following morning, Naomi stood in her office, the photograph from the anonymous sender still clutched in her hand. The faint noise of students arriving for the day drifted through the windows, a reminder of why she was fighting so hard. Sarah had spent most of the night sifting through the forwarded emails and cross-referencing details. The messages were damning, but they weren't enough to definitively prove Eleanor and Charles's involvement. They needed more, and time was running out. By midday, the Preservation Committee had called an emergency meeting, claiming it was to address the growing concerns regarding the headmaster's recent conduct. It was clear they intended to push for Naomi's resignation. The air was thick with tension as faculty and board members filed into the ornate conference room. Naomi entered last, her expression composed despite the storm brewing around her. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her polished smile firmly in place, while Charles leaned back in his chair, exuding quiet confidence. Naomi took her seat, her pulse steady. She had spent the morning preparing for this moment, carefully crafting her defense. What she hadn't prepared for, however, was the unexpected arrival of an unlikely ally. As the meeting began, the door creaked open, and in walked Maya, the student who had been quietly documenting the undercurrents of the school's politics. She carried a tablet and an expression that wavered between determination and nervousness. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice firm despite the quiver beneath. "I believe I have something that might interest everyone here. We've planted enough doubt. The board won't support her after this," Charles said, his tone smug. Eleanor leaned in, her voice dripping with disdain. "If they hesitate, we'll release the next set of documents. By the time we're done, she won't be employable anywhere." The room fell silent, the weight of the evidence sinking in. Eleanor's face turned pale, and Charles's usual air of confidence evaporated. Naomi stared at the screen, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over her. She had suspected their involvement, but hearing their words left no doubt. "I think this provides enough clarity about the so-called concerns regarding Dr. Bennett's leadership," Maya said, her voice steady now. "And for the record, I've kept copies of everything. If anything happens to me or Dr. Bennett, this will go public." Eleanor stammered, her composure cracking. "This is an invasion of privacy. This video is inadmissible. It proves nothing." But before she could say more, another voice cut through the room. It was one of the board members, an older man who had remained silent through most of the proceedings. "It proves enough," he said firmly. "Eleanor, Charles, your actions are not only unethical, but potentially criminal. I'll be recommending an immediate suspension for both of you pending further investigation." The tide had turned, but the final twist came when Maya handed Naomi a small flash drive. "There's more," she said softly. "I didn't know how deep this went until I started digging, but Eleanor and Charles have been diverting funds from the school's endowment for years. They've been using their influence to funnel money into private accounts. That's why they couldn't afford to let you stay. You would have uncovered it eventually." Naomi felt the breath leave her lungs. This wasn't just about her. Eleanor and Charles had been exploiting the very institution they claimed to protect, betraying the trust of every family and student at Windsor Academy. The fallout was swift. Eleanor and Charles were removed from their positions on the board, and a full investigation was launched into their financial dealings. Parents and donors who had initially sided with them quickly distanced themselves, horrified by the revelations. The scandal rocked Windsor Academy, but it also marked a turning point. For the first time, the school's culture of secrecy and exclusion was being challenged head-on. In the weeks that followed, Naomi focused on rebuilding trust within the community. She held open forums with parents and students, listened to their concerns, and began implementing reforms to make Windsor more inclusive and transparent. Maya became a quiet hero among her peers, her bravery inspiring other students to speak out against injustices they had witnessed but been too afraid to confront. As for the anonymous sender of the initial emails, their identity remained a mystery. Naomi suspected it was someone within the committee who had grown disillusioned with Eleanor and Charles's methods, but she chose not to pursue it further. Sometimes allies appeared when least expected, and their motives, while unclear, had ultimately helped uncover the truth. Months later, as Naomi stood on the stage at Windsor's graduation ceremony, she looked out at the sea of faces, students, parents, and faculty, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been grueling, the obstacles immense, but she had fought for what she believed in and won. The applause that filled the hall was a testament not just to her resilience, but to the power of standing up against those who sought to divide and oppress. And yet, as the applause faded, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Change was a constant battle, and there would always be those who resisted it. But for now, she was ready. The storm had passed, and Windsor Academy was finally moving toward the future she had envisioned. The days following the graduation ceremony were quieter, but they carried the kind of quiet Naomi had long hoped for, peaceful, purposeful, and filled with a sense of renewal. Windsor Academy had weathered the storm, and while scars from the ordeal remained, they served as reminders of what had been overcome. Naomi spent much of the summer working alongside the staff to finalize the changes she had introduced, ensuring the school's foundation was stronger and more equitable than ever before. Maya became a frequent visitor to Naomi's office, not because of any trouble, but because the bond they had formed during the conflict had turned into a mentorship. Naomi admired Maya's courage and intellect, and Maya, in turn, saw Naomi as a role model who had shown her what it meant to fight for justice without losing grace. Together, they brainstormed ideas for student-led initiatives, with Maya taking the lead on a project to document Windsor's history and highlight stories of resilience and change. One lingering question gnawed at Naomi, though: the identity of the anonymous ally who had leaked the emails and photograph that ultimately exposed Eleanor and Charles. She thought about it often, replaying moments in her mind, searching for clues in the faces of those who had stood silently or subtly supported her throughout the ordeal. But the sender never revealed themselves. It became one of those mysteries she learned to let go of, a reminder that sometimes change required unexpected help from unseen hands. By the time the new school year began, the atmosphere at Windsor felt markedly different. Parents who had once regarded Naomi with suspicion now greeted her warmly, their earlier reservations softened by the evidence of her integrity and vision. The faculty, too, seemed more unified, no longer walking on eggshells or divided by old loyalties. Naomi had made it clear that the era of secrecy and exclusion was over, and her leadership had inspired a renewed sense of purpose among the staff. Naomi's changes went beyond the surface. She established a scholarship fund for underrepresented students, funded in part by donors who had rallied behind her during the scandal. She also revamped the curriculum to include more diverse perspectives, ensuring that Windsor's students were not just academically excellent, but also culturally aware and empathetic leaders of the future. The school's traditions remained intact, but they were now framed in a way that celebrated inclusivity rather than exclusivity. On a crisp autumn afternoon, as Naomi walked across the campus, she noticed a group of students sitting under the large oak tree near the library. They were deep in discussion, their laughter punctuated by moments of thoughtful debate. Among them was Maya, animatedly gesturing as she made a point. Naomi paused, watching them with a smile. This was what she had fought for, a community where every voice mattered, where every student felt seen and valued. Later that evening, as Naomi prepared to leave for the day, she found a small note slipped under her office door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words stopped her in her tracks. "You've done well. Windsor is in good hands. Thank you for seeing it through." There was no signature, no clue as to who had written it, but Naomi felt a warmth spread through her chest. It didn't matter who the note had come from. What mattered was the affirmation it carried, a quiet acknowledgement of everything she had endured and achieved. As winter approached, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought her to Windsor. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the sacrifices she had made, and the moments when she had questioned whether it was all worth it. The backlash, the betrayals, the sleepless nights, they had all been part of a larger story, one that was still unfolding. Windsor Academy was just one chapter, but it was a significant one, a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. The school year unfolded with its usual rhythm, but there was a renewed sense of possibility in the air. Students began taking greater ownership of their education and community, launching clubs and initiatives that reflected their diverse interests and passions. Parents who had once been vocal critics became allies, volunteering their time and resources to support Naomi's vision. And while the ghosts of the past lingered in small ways, an occasional pointed comment, a lingering doubt from those slow to change, the overwhelming sense was one of progress and hope. One afternoon, Maya stopped by Naomi's office with an update on her project. She had been working tirelessly to compile interviews, photographs, and documents that told the story of Windsor's transformation. As she laid out her progress, she turned to Naomi with a thoughtful expression. "You know," Maya said, "when I started this, I thought it was going to be about exposing the bad stuff, about showing how things went wrong. But the more I worked on it, the more I realized it's really about people like you, people who see the cracks and choose to fix them instead of walking away. That's the real story." Naomi felt a lump rise in her throat, but managed a smile. "It's not just my story, Maya. It's ours. You played a big part in this too." Maya grinned, her confidence shining through. "Maybe, but someone had to show me how to start." As the months turned into years, Windsor Academy became a model for other schools grappling with similar challenges. Naomi's leadership was celebrated not just within the school, but beyond its gates, as her story inspired others to take a stand in their own communities. She was invited to speak at conferences and write about her experiences, but she always returned to Windsor, to the students and staff who had become her second family. In the quiet moments, when the campus was still and the weight of the day had lifted, Naomi often thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the people who had tried to tear her down and the ones who had lifted her up. She thought about the battles she had fought and the victories she had won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Naomi knew there would always be new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But as she walked the familiar paths of Windsor Academy, surrounded by the laughter of students and the rustling of leaves in the autumn breeze, she felt ready. She had weathered the storm, and in doing so, she had built something enduring, a legacy of hope, resilience, and change. And for that, she was grateful.